on the audit process and progress and corrective actions that were identified in the last report delivered to you. So Kurt is going to do most of the heavy lifting on the presentation on the district financial update, and then we have Alan Moran here as well, our Director of Financial Reporting and Controller, to talk about the audit status. So with that, I'll let Kurt go ahead and get started, and then I think he's probably comfortable with jump in with questions as they go.
Yep, by all means, please stop me if anything doesn't make sense or you want to question something. Be happy to answer it in a moment. We've got three basic things we'll talk about. We'll talk about cash flow and unspent authorized balance, and then Assistant Superintendent Ramey will talk about some fiscal philosophy at the end of the presentation. So starting off with, I just want to make sure we have a level set that everybody understands. As we're talking about finances, we have two distinct concepts that we're talking about. So there's cash flow, which is our money in and money out of our bank accounts. And then we have our unspent authorized balance, unspent authorized budget, whatever term you want to use, which is more of our credit limits. So if you have a question, I might stop you and say, wait, are you talking about the cash flow side, or are you talking about the unspent authorized balance side? But just important to keep those two distinct things moving forward. So as far as cash flow, this is our fiscal year 25 revenues versus expenditures for the whole year. So the blue line is revenue, red line is expenses. Fiscal year 25 is the year that ended on June 30 of 25, so all of last school year. And so you can see this is a pretty normal trend overall in terms of, in the fall, our revenues do not keep up pace with our expenditures because, again, September is that first month where we have our largest payroll with our new teachers and our 10-month employees all coming back from their summer breaks. And so in October, we get that large property tax payment, which is why you see that line spike back up over the expenditure line, and then comes close again back in, I believe, April, if you draw that line straight up. Again, April, we get our second property tax receipt from the county. That line jumps back up. And then we finish out the year. And you can see June jumps up high in this graph because our August and September payrolls are booked back to June because of the way the fiscal year works for schools. When we bring a teacher on, their first paycheck isn't until September, but they're actually brought on in that fiscal year. And so that's why June looks like it's got a giant spike up because those payrolls are booked back to that month after that time. So then as we look at this year, same story, similar trajectories overall. But one thing to note is if your cash balance is low, obviously this is just a cash in, cash out situation on this graph. But if your cash fund balance is low, that's what necessitated the interfund loan, right? Because we've got to meet our obligations, and so that's what necessitated that at that time. Again, we get that October property tax statement, and we're back over above the expenditures. Any questions on any of that so far?
Last year, like when we look at the red and the blue, they're very similar between the FY25 and FY26 graphs. How did we have the cash flow last year to meet it, but not this year?
So my assumption is we started with a higher fund balance last year, and then with the increased cost between last year and this year, we didn't have that extra cash balance on hand.
And the increased costs were?
Payroll is one of the things, and we'll talk about that moving forward here. So again, some of this we covered just with those graphs. So October and April, we get probably just shy of $90 million in property tax revenue. We're a property-rich district across Iowa. There's districts that rely more on state aid, so property taxes are very important to us in that regard. But state aid payments, where the state makes up that difference to get us to that district cost per pupil, is about $10 million per month, and we only get those through the months of September and June. So 10 out of the 12 months of the year, we get that $10 million. So you can see once we get to April, we're obviously not getting any large property tax revenue until we get back, obviously, again to October, but then in July and August, we don't have any state aid that's coming in. So that's why that September payroll and expenditure is tight. And so then our other revenues, such as our federal grants or any other miscellaneous income we have, are more variable month to month. Some of that's like open enrollment billing. We'll take care of that coming up here soon. Special ed billing, things of that nature. It's a little more variable. So with our increased expenditures, we are projecting that we'll need a short-term solution, otherwise known as a loan, for March, and then we'll have a longer-term solution we'll be looking at for fiscal year 27. One of the important things to note is our spending authority, which again is more of our credit limit, often lags at least one fiscal year behind our cash flow. So the example I'll give with our special ed deficit, which jumped from approximately 10 million in fiscal year 24 to over 18 million in fiscal year 25. We spent that cash in fiscal year 25. We get the authority granted back in the next fiscal year that's put back on fiscal year 25, but we don't actually have the ability to levy to recover those funds until fiscal year 27. So it's really a 3-year process to get back to whole on those, just the way Iowa school funding is designed.
Did we think about that when we decided to transition that special ed deficit? Or, I mean, basically we doubled it, it ballooned.
Right.
So did we think about the implications of that and what that would mean for our cash flow and our payroll?
I would say, I mean, I think the part we'll be honest about in this is that, we should have articulated and had a better plan regarding cash flow. And so that's a compounding factor. You're exactly right, Director Fitch, but I don't think that's something that we had a great plan to navigate and prepare for. And so that's why we're seeing the issues we are this year. That's an easy example to point to. There's some other things that, of course, we'll talk about that increase that pressure on the cash that also would have, should have signaled the need for a larger cash flow strategy.
So we keep asking why this year is different, why are we needing a loan? So, and you're saying that that's one of the reasons, but not the only reason.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say our other reason is that our expenditures went beyond our projections. And so what we had projected, what we would have authorized to happen, we went beyond that. And so that'll be part of where we do get some interplay between the cash conversation and then also the authority conversation.
Do we have an idea, and if so, what is it, the short-term loan solution will be? How much?
Yeah, so a takeaway from tonight would be we'd want to talk to you probably next week in a work session about what those options would look like. We're still in the process of working with Allers and a couple lenders around about what that could be. We think right now for a ballpark for the March solution, 3 to 5 million for that time period. That would be more of a short-term loan than what the initial loan has turned into because of the receipt of those property tax payments in April.
Do we know what, I guess you probably don't know what the rates are or anything like that yet?
No, that's the meetings we'll have yet this week to know an interest rate. And the other part about the interest rate that I would say is because it is much shorter term, right? I mean, the interest impact on that one should be less. I think as we talked about the larger and longer term loan, that's the one that, well, there will be, some significant interest implications with that one.
So there'll be a larger, longer-term loan on top of it? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to...
No, it's a good question. So that bullet point leads to there would be a need for some borrowing in March to take care of that. And then as we look at the next fiscal year, as we work to correct this, there'd be a need for a larger, longer-term loan at that point. And that's what we'll want to talk about next week is your comfort level with that and the solution there, because that does also impact how we would decrease overall costs next year, depending on the size of any kind of reduction we want to make. There is some, again, interplay with the size of the loan that you would take to address that.
And the interest would come out of the general fund?
Correct.
Okay.
And you're
Thank
talking
you.
about interest, the interest cost of these short-term borrowings, necessities. We're going to subtract both the cost of the interest on the loan itself and any interest that's earned because of the deposit of the loan and increasing the cash balance.
Correct. That's what we would talk to you about in that strategy, Charlie, is there's potential to offset some of that interest with the loan.
So we get a clear idea of what the actual total interest cost is.
Yeah, that's what we'd want to have some better confidence to talk to you about. Yep.
You said 3 to 5.
Yeah,
I just
for
want to
March.
have it for the...
So moving off of our cash balances, let's talk about unspent authorized budget. So it's spending authority that the state grants us. So authority is the ceiling and it's permission to spend, not necessarily cash. So every year we get a maximum authorized budget. Unfortunately, it's set after our fiscal year ends due to some variables that we run through with our state reporting. But that's, again, think of that as a credit limit or the max we can spend, not necessarily the cash we're getting in or the full amount of expenses we have. And that's driven primarily by our regular program district costs. So that's the state cost per pupil that's adjusted by SSA. Again, that's only a portion of our total receipts that we get across the district. But that's, when people talk about SSA and how does that affect all this, that's the regular program district cost, the cost per pupil, which again is a portion of our total receipts, but not all of our receipts. And then we have additional levies that, such as our cash reserve levy, our state aid that we've talked about. And then the other allowed adjustments are modified supplemental amounts. Those of you who've been on the board for a while, we do this usually in the fall and a little bit in the spring, but those are those things that we request through the SBRC to get additional funding authority. So again, for that special ed deficit, we're allowed to request that authority back. It's what's called a class action through the SBRC. They take all school districts at once, approve them all at once. The one-off items that the SBRC approves are more rare, but that's one that all districts submit on. And so that modified supplemental amount, again, just grants you the authority, but doesn't necessarily give you a cash revenue source for that request.
So, Kurt, the MSA revenue is paid after we paid the cost?
Correct, yep. And about a whole fiscal year later, to be honest.
Okay.
So just a very basic and rough equation to give you for an unspent authorized budget. So you take your authorized budget, whatever your max according to the state level is, and you subtract that from your actual expenditures to date. And those actual expenditures would be the cash you have outstanding for any expenditures. So again, a real quick, simple example, if the district's authorized budget is $10 million and they spend 9.2 on the year, then their unspent authorized budget is $800,000. So that $800,000 would carry forward into future years. It doesn't expire unless you use it, and then it can be used when spending authority is tight if you have the cash. So it gives you that flexibility. You know, maybe should SSA not be at a rate that the district feels comfortable in working in the future with. If you have that authority and you have the cash, you have that ability to offset that. So what unspent authorized budget is not, it is not cash. So when you see those reports, you know, that we have $3 million in unspent authorized budget or $5 million, that's not necessarily a cash level that we have. It's not fund balance. It's, again, more of a credit limit than anything. Not savings in a bank account and not automatically spendable without money. So if you have the cash, you can do it. If you don't have the cash, you can't. So again, you still need the actual resources such as cash, fund balances, and revenues to spend it. So when we compare ourselves to some of our peers across the state, the other districts you see are the original 8 UEN districts, just because they're the larger districts that would have a little bit more similar demographics compared to us in terms of enrollment. You can see we are kind of an outlier overall across our peers. So Cedar Rapids obviously has a higher UAB than we do. Davenport, Des Moines, Dubuque, so on and so forth. Matt has shared that in terms of those who pretty regularly visit the SBRC, it's typically us in Council Bluffs. So anything you want to add on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll just kind of probably link to the part Chase ends with, right? I mean, I think typically here in Iowa City, we've flown that really close to that zero range, and of course we wanted to try to build that, but I think it, you know, begs the question for us to look at our overall strategy to do that as we've continued to try to make investments into our kids, but then also deal with the realities of the financial pressures. We're not seeing a lot of success in that approach, that we typically build it a little bit and then we reinvest in, and then we're 2 or 3 years later in another cut scenario. And that's been my experience, just from being here in the district, whether superintendent or otherwise. And so I think for us, how do we get on a trajectory that sets us on a different course there? Because with some of the issues we're talking about here tonight, we don't have those balances to deal with either variables in the equation, that can jump a lot, or if again our projections are off in an investment we wanted to make. And so we really don't have a buffer created, which is what this graph is reflecting on the authority side.
So moving into what we're anticipating for expenditures to get through this year. We've seen an overall increase in our payroll costs month to month, cash out the door, on an average of 9%. You can see some of the months that we have our actual data for. Some are higher than that, some are lower than that, but the average we have is 9%. In month-to-month comparison over last year. And so our total cash payroll, we're projecting for out of the, is 194,400,000 and some change. We can take out the nutrition services fund. Those employees are all paid out of that fund, which is more of a self-sustaining fund. So then that gives us our anticipated general fund payroll total, both salary and benefits, of just over 189 million.
I guess the question I think a lot of people in the community have when they see this chart, why didn't we notice our payroll had ballooned by September?
I would say September, you only have one data point.
Then we have October, November. I'm not trying to be mean here.
Sure.
I'm just trying to ask the questions that a lot of people want to know.
Yeah, it's a good question. September, you've only got the 1 month where you've kind of gone back to your full level of staffing. And so, yeah, in theory, October and November, you could have seen that there was more of a trend there than just maybe an outlier that you were hoping September was.
But did we, I don't remember frankly, did we budget for a average payroll increase 25 to 26 of 9%?
No.
No.
No, our expectation was a 2 to 3% increase that we would have seen in those payroll costs. Would have reflected some more of the agreements we made on our settlements. So this is not something we anticipated. Our team, as we looked at that second quarter data come in the October, November, December payrolls, when we looked at that in January, that was obviously our flag for concern at that point, knowing that these payrolls are coming in much higher than we had agreed to. I think Director Lingo's point to around September, right, that should have been an alarm bell to say, okay, why is that so much higher? And so I think now that creates some significant challenges here for us the second half of the year and things we want to do to try to control some of those costs as we head towards the close of the fiscal year.
Can you remind us what you attribute that increase to in that payroll, the higher than expected?
I think you're leading me into my next set of slides, so appreciate that. So there's obviously a lot of different ways that you could take that 189 number, that projection, and try to figure out what happened where, right? And so we've got a couple different things here that we can look at. This is just broken out by our contract group, and this is our data that came out of our Vista Iowa HR management system. So this is tracking employee contracts that are on file. So if I'm a teacher contracted at $55,000 a year, that's what's going to be reflected in this for both years. So it captures that change. If I'm an hourly employee that's a full-time, and my wage goes from $18 an hour to $18.50, that's what's captured in this change. And then the same thing for the school year employees, right? So even if you're part-time, it tries to capture all that. And this is wage-only data. This is not including any benefit costs or anything of that. And so you can see what different groups shook out to be. Again, we won't talk about nutrition services, paraeducators. Again, that kind of points toward that special ed deficit that we both increase our salaries for the paraeducators, but then also increased in number. Same thing with hourly employees, although they're not as large a percentage overall. Our secretary groups, we gave those employees experience for past experience, and so they were allowed to maybe move up on the salary schedule. And then our salaried support staff were added positions on top of raises. teachers being at 5% shows that they were, some positions added, but they're obviously our largest group overall. And then administrators were just under 3% overall. So any questions on any of that? In the next few slides, I think, kind of talking a little bit more detail about that.
Is that administrator number, is that accurate? It seems kind of low, because I know we added some central admin positions, and I guess I'm just curious where you got that figure from.
Yeah, so that's broken out by contract group, and there could be some, what you're referring to might actually be classified as support staff salary.
Okay.
Rather than administrator. There's kind of a dividing line there that might not be as visible as you think it would be.
But the total increase is accurate, is that right?
Yeah, based on our data, yes.
It kind of is just what people think about in terms of administrative positions, right? The year-round admin, that would be folks on administrative contracts as pulled by our HR system. There might be other folks, if they see them work at the central office, they might assume admin, and then I think that's where Kurt's making the link to the support staff salary. But the source data is yes from our HR system there.
Kurt, I don't expect you to be able to pull these numbers tonight, but if you can come back with them later, just the change in the number of FTE.
Sure.
Between those categories.
Yeah, there's some data that will go on the next slide, but for sure, we don't have a package that has all of that.
Yeah. Thank you.
So then this is more of a
Well, can I just go back one moment? So the table, was it possible to anticipate what this table was going to be back when we started the fiscal year?
I would have said some of it for sure. In my mind, and I certainly would default to Superintendent Degner, Associate Superintendent Ramey, but the para number is probably where we see the most volatility, because the decisions to add those positions are very local compared to other things. So you can have a teacher who advocates for a student to have a one-on-one based on their individual educational needs, and certainly we want to provide that if that's what's necessary for that student. However, that employee being added to the system may never really go much beyond that building, if that makes sense.
So this is looking at an overall percent increase in these payroll costs of about 7.8%, which is actually less than previous amount of 9%.
Yeah.
Right?
So the important thing to keep in mind is that other number on the previous slides includes benefits also.
Okay, all right. So that indicates that benefits are not a very large contributor to these payroll
But
cost increases. Is that
right, somewhat. But remember, for every dollar we pay somebody, we have to pay Social Security tax, we have to pay their retirement.
Right.
So a dollar we spend out, there's actually additional dollars behind it, and that's what's more represented in that benefit cost.
Okay, thank you.
I know we're going to get to payroll increases later, but do you have the numbers that you can actually share what we thought the settlement agreement percentage would increase those rates by? Contract groups by?
We could go back and pull that data for sure. So overall, within the teachers, the changes in negotiations account for approximately $3.2 million. Just some high level, we added preschool, which portion of that is charged to special education. And then we added 11.5 teachers kind of all across the district to support various initiatives. Paraeducators, we added the 2-hour differential. We had 550 that were used in the negotiation data, and we had 600, I believe 633 at one point was what number I saw. And our special education preschool paraprofessionals, we've increased those by 40 positions. And so that gives you the picture of those.
Could you go back to the preschool? Like, we've been told quite a few times that the preschool is operating in the black. Is it now operating in the red as a program?
I think that would depend on how you view the way we're funded for special education, right? And so we have that sped deficit where we understand we get a certain amount per student, but we know that doesn't cover full until we're made whole again theoretically by the following year. And so we will get that at some point. We may just not have it right this second, if that
So
makes
it's
sense.
possible we grew that too fast.
Could be.
Too fast for the cash is
Yeah.
like maybe the link
Yeah.
to make there, right? That the authority, that part can be seen as more solvent, but from the cash perspective, it created some pressure on that end for sure.
And how confident are we that in that cash being there in the next year?
So that'll be part of our budgeting process that will kick off for sure in March. So the budgeting process is through the Iowa Department of Management, that we have to build a budget and then we submit that to the county to then levy our property taxes that give us those. And so I can tell you right now, based on the information in the system, our maximum cash reserve levy for fiscal year 27 is going to be just over $30 million, whereas the previous year was 24. And so we will see an increased ability to levy additional dollars. And obviously the board's going to have input on whether or not we levy that when we get through that process. So that's where we can begin to recoup those funds.
But just to go back to the preschool, just to clarify, it is solvent. It's kind of like our special ed cost for preschool, we have an outstanding invoice for,
Yeah.
and we just haven't received the cash yet for.
Correct.
But it's still not, we're still in the black.
Yeah.
We're not in the red.
Correct.
And we don't have, as you guys have told numerous times, general fund expenses attributed to preschool. It's self-sustaining. We just haven't gotten all the cash that we're
Sure.
owed for it yet.
Preschool still lives within the general fund. I don't want anybody to be confused that it's the separate thing that's hanging out there. It still lives within the general fund. We have statewide voluntary preschool program dollars that we get. Oddly enough, they get a half per kid. Why a preschooler is worth a half according to the state is a different debate for a different night on that regard. But that's kind of our district cost per pupil for that program. And then we obviously have tuition dollars coming in for those 4-year-olds who don't qualify based on the SWPPP standards.
As an additional source of revenue.
Correct.
Kurt, I have another question, and I'm sorry if we're to go back 2 slides to that payroll cost slide. Well, actually, leave it there for a second. To determine the amount of increased of benefits, could we take that 189 number and subtract from it the 173 number, which gets us, what, a little under 16 million?
Yeah, but that's not going to give you your, that's
Well,
not.
but then when you go down
Or
to
when you
the
go down to the
slide
next one, you'll see the
about
increase in
that's
benefits.
just wages, looks like it's a little over $10 million. So
Right.
is the benefits what's left? I mean, are we looking at an increased cost of benefits around $5 million?
I think based on this presentation, that's the best estimate you can make with this data.
Okay, so
If
it
that's a
does
fair
sound like
response.
it's a substantial, I mean, if 10 million is wages and 5 million is benefits is a substantial
Right.
amount.
I'm going to point to Alan, because he and I have a lot of these conversations between us, but what I would say is, if you just look at salaries, benefits are about 30% additional on top of that. And so that's our FICA and IPERS, our healthcare insurance costs, dental insurance costs, any other retirement plans that are a part of that. Is that a fair statement to make?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's medical, retirement, government taxes.
So we should be able to predict benefits when we raise salaries.
Correct.
It's pretty consistently about 30% of total salary costs in
Got
a
it?
2-year
And now
comparison.
track with 5.
Yeah. So then we talked about our secretaries, I believe. So then our year-round support staff, these are some of our building level initiatives where we had behavior interventionists, lead support teachers, some of our dropout general fund, our engagement and intervention strategists. So just kind of some positions that still work with kids and affect the classroom that we've added to help meet some needs. And then obviously some district office staff as well. Any questions on any of that? You guys had great questions leading up to that, but anything before we kind of close the book on payroll?
Just going back to preschool and the question about scaling up too fast, I mean, it doesn't sound like it's a scaling up too fast problem, because whenever we add a special ed para, there's going to be this 18-month lag. So it's, right, it's really just the way it's funded.
Yeah, it's a problem with the model.
A problem with the system.
Yeah,
It's really a
But again,
cash
it's-
flow problem, right?
Yeah.
Strain on the cash.
Yes.
yeah.
But again, we could have predicted the cash issue, or we should have been able to predict the cash issue out of it.
Yes, no,
Yeah.
yes, that's accurate, but we can't say no to our 3-year-old special ed or preschool kids, right? Like, we have to serve them via state law, so we should have been able to predict it, but again, it doesn't seem like it's implementing it too fast or
Yeah.
getting over our skis. It's just, again, a system
Yeah.
problem.
I think we're just trying to make sure that we understand it so that we can make adjustments so that this
Yeah.
doesn't happen again. It's not a matter of blaming or stopping programming or taking things away. We're just trying to understand this so that we can make adjustments.
Yeah.
And in terms of my view of what not happening again, is not anticipating that it's going to be a cash flow deficit. It's going to have to be resolved with a temporary borrowing and calculating the cost, the total debt cost of that temporary borrowing.
Sure.
And whether or not we can tolerate borrowing under the conditions.
Yeah. So then, now we're going to shift to talking about how our current expenditure levels are going to project for our UAB. So within the government accounting code structure, there's like a 90-page manual online that I love for all of you to read and become experts on. The last 3 digits of every, what are there, 18 digits in the whole account code, Alan? I don't know.
It depends on what part of the financial you're
Right.
looking at.
Yeah, somewhere, give or take. The last 3 digits are objects, and so that's the last thing that quantifies what type of expense it is. So 100s are salaries and wages, 200s are benefit costs, then 300s are educational, purchase and professional technical services. 400s are property services, that would be like where our water bills come out of, electrical bills, any repairs or maintenance costs we have based on property. 500s are other purchase services, so transportation, open enrollment comes out in and out of this. 600s are supplies. 700s are property or equipment, so why that number, the 700 is low, because that a lot of times gets shifted into Save and Pebble. 800s are debt service, which again is very minimal for the general fund. Then the 900s are other items, indirect costs, any account transfers, and that's where our AEA flow through lives. So you can see in the expenses to date percent increase column, you see that 9.09 comparing January to January of this year to last year, 5.75% increase in benefits. But then you see we're actually, outside of debt service, tracking lower in our overall expenses in those other categories compared to last year. The percent of total expenditures column next to it, again, is just to show the order of magnitude of what percentage of the total budget are those items overall.
And if debt service is the loan,
That would be where we would have to service that. Obviously, there's nothing outside of the health insurance fund loan that will come out of that.
So the salaries and benefits, when added together, are 86.37%.
Yeah.
And this is, we're talking general fund.
Yeah.
So that's a danger zone.
Yeah.
It's recommended that we be as close to 80% as possible, definitely not above 85.
Correct. Yep. So then as we're trying to project out our UAB, our maximum authorized budget, again, is an estimate. That won't actually be set till probably next October after we submit our certified annual report in September. So that puts our best estimate for our max authorized budgets to just over $227 million. So we utilize our projected salary and benefit costs. Again, that's a 9% increase on FY25 for the remaining months of the year. We're obviously going to track that the rest of the way to see how we're doing overall. But then if we took those remaining object codes and added 2% growth on top of those from their fiscal year 25 levels, that shows we have a projected overall amount of expenditures of $223,964,000 and some change. So our unspent authorized budget would be just over 3.2 million. I think you all had seen a lot of projections that we were at 4.5 million this year. Actually, the State Department of Management, and a file we'll look at here soon, shows that we're actually at 5 for our unspent authorized budget, but it's still marked as estimated on that document. So this is the file that the state puts out. Again, the Department of Management. There's a link if anybody wants to click on it and play with it themselves. This is just an overall snapshot. Every district across the state is in here. Again, you can see, I'm going to go to the next one, in the very bottom right, that's that $5 million number I was talking about. So there's 3 variables within this that we have to begin to predict to understand where we're going to be with our UAB for next year. So the first one is our SBRC modified supplemental amount, other number 1. In layman's terms, that is our limited English proficiency deficit that you all will approve in the fall. So think of the SPED deficit, but for our ELL students. It's the same principle. That's what that number represents. The next one, the 1.3, is plugged in by the state. That's kind of all the other MSAs that you guys approved, kind of all conglomerated together. The special ed deficit speaks for itself. And then the last variable that we have that we've got to try to predict or understand is our other miscellaneous income. So that is basically taking our total revenues minus our property taxes, our state foundation aid, a couple of other handful of things, and that represents the revenue we get from other sources. So biggest driver of that's our federal funds in terms of title grants, all 4 title grants, any other kind of local money we generate that's not related to taxes. And you can see that number has been pretty steady across the way there. So as we project these variables, this screen I'm showing you shows all those variables remain where they were for fiscal year 25. Again, we could debate whether or not that's a good position to be in, but we wanted to show if everything stayed the same across the board. Director Lingo, you look like you're posing a question.
Finish your thought and then I'll pose the question.
Okay. So if everything stayed the same, our MSA, remember I said it was 227. If everything stayed the same, our max authorized budget would be in this one 226. We plug in the number of our projected expenditures, we get to just over $2 million. So still on the positive side, which is where we have to be, but it does decrease overall. Go ahead.
This is quick. So in the special ed deficit amount, what cash are we seeing this school year? Are we seeing the $10.9 million this school year is what we're getting in cash flow? Which
I'm not sure I'm following your question.
the way I understand the lag.
Oh, the lag.
Where does the cash flow for fiscal year 26? How much money are we seeing? Is that 10.9?
Yeah, correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, that would be what we'd be held to.
So we won't see the 18.3 until fiscal year
27.
Okay.
Correct. Yep. Sorry,
No.
I follow you now.
Yeah, got it.
So then, if we start to play with this a little bit, so that LEP deficit, that's line number 17 there, if we put that at an average of the previous 2 years, if we kind of think our special ed deficit's going to go up just because some of the changes we've talked about from a payroll standpoint, we believe it's going to go up. 19 million for that just as a projection, and then miscellaneous income, that goes also to a 2-year average of the previous 2 years. Expenditure levels stay the same, and our unspent authorized budget is just over 3.6.
So if the blue boxes increase, our unspent authorized balance budget increases.
Correct.
So part of our work will be to do the best we can with trying to refine some of those numbers. I think we feel like we have a potentially good model on the miscellaneous income to try to forecast that with some help from some folks from the outside. The one thing I would say about the special ed deficit, you guys know we completed a review with the Department of Ed on the special ed deficit, and so when we did talk to the SBRC about the trajectory of our budget, they had mentioned that if there's an adjustment to that, as you know, several districts are completing that review, if a district can handle it on the authority side, they would ask them to make that correction right away. If it's a district like ours, it would be very narrow. If there was some kind of a large swing there, they would likely work with us on that over several fiscal years or a couple fiscal years. I think they said timeline-wise, they were targeting the completion of those in the fall.
Yeah,
Those
that
reviews.
sounds like at the earliest it'd be in the fall.
It was pretty extensive. It was a large load to turn around to them. There was some reasoning of the positions, of course, that we have accounted for there. But I would just want to note, you know, that we could see an adjustment in that regard.
And just to make clear for the community, my understanding is the reason that our miscellaneous income is so large in fiscal year 22-23 is that's our COVID funds.
Correct.
So we do not expect you to find miscellaneous income this year that gets us to those levels. That's not,
That'd
we're
be
not
great.
going to see, well, it would be
Yeah.
great, but just to
Not
level set
realistic.
expectations.
Yeah.
Those aren't realistic numbers
Right.
anymore because those had COVID dollars in them.
Correct.
So could I ask at this point, has the EA received this information, so they're aware of the same numbers we're looking at?
So, which group are you?
The teachers union.
I'll default.
Well, tonight, I mean, I've been in, consultation, throughout the
Okay,
month.
so we do have some communication
Yeah,
with you
we have a
guys.
good partnership.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
Right,
but,
okay.
not in advance of, in this meeting broadly speaking, but there's awareness that about the loan, Superintendent Dinger sent out a, video message, and that went out to all staff, so,
Right, okay.
yeah, I'm updated for sure, so.
Part of our plan, Charlie, would be, as we sequence through meetings here, that we would follow up with staff after our board meetings to then share that information. So we'll be linking this conversation into that message, whether it's video or written, this week to say, we looked at some different models and shared that information out. Brady does some of his own communication. We've tried to keep him up to date, but of course, as we flow communication to people, we want to stage it in pieces that can be digestible, that they can ask questions and understand. Since they're not close to school finance either.
Okay, thank you.
So I have the last few slides this evening. We're going to shift away from the data, so just pause for any questions about the cash flow or the UAB from board members. And Director Lingo and President Malone, I am conscious of the time, and I know there's another agenda item you want to get to. So for the whole board, I don't mean to shortchange this, but Superintendent Degner talked a little bit about this earlier, about the approach we've taken, where we spend down our UAB, and then we make cuts, and then we spend down again. And we think this is an opportunity for us to really reset that deck as we move forward, and as that last bullet says, to develop a better financial stability through a larger UAB. And of course, this is a multi-year strategy and outlook, and one that we want to collaborate with the board, and of course our community and our buildings on how we get there, and to provide a more sustainable, focused approach as we move forward long term. But that also requires some short-term steps that we take right now. Kurt, if you can advance the first slide. And so we've used this term recalibrating as we go through this spring. Kurt did a nice job of looking at all our object codes, and we know that about 86% of our budget right now is tied up in our salary and benefits, and so those numbers are locked. But we believe that we can keep our cost aligned to or even less than what our budget levels were in the other object code areas for FY25 by making some adjustments. Kurt already showed you where our spend to date in those categories were. If we lean into some things that we still do have an opportunity to impact this fiscal year, That will help us as we, again, look at finishing out this year and start our planning into next year. We say could because we've not made any final determinations. We've started to have those conversations with our building administrators, Brady, in collaboration with our teachers association, so we can keep everyone in the loop as we look at what we do as we move forward this fall. And as that last bullet says, salaries and benefits are set, and so they won't be impacted. So we start a process of looking at things for cost control short-term yet this spring, as then we look at into FY27 and our planning for next year. As Superintendent talked about, there are a number of different factors that influence next year's budget, and every budget year in Iowa. And we need to continue to be fiscally vigilant around revenues and then also our expenditures. Matt mentioned that we would hopefully have another session as early as next Tuesday with the board to continue this conversation. But we've targeted the last meeting of February, or the second meeting of February, not at a work session, but during the regular meeting, for us to bring back more detailed options and ideas about how we look at the budget as we move into 2027, or excuse me, FY27. And again, taking a bit of a different look that perhaps that we've done in the past, as not just looking as how do we look at the budget for next year, what is that budget impact for the year after that and the year after that, so we can have that multi-pronged, multi-view focus as we build out our fiscal portfolio for the long-term success of the school district. Negotiations, of course, those are still on deck for later this spring. Sometimes we start earlier in the fall. This year we project starting a little bit later in the process. I know I went quickly, but
Yeah,
again, trying to
I mean-
respect the time. And I think the big takeaway is we plan to come back to the board both in work
Yeah.
session and during the public meeting here in the next couple of weeks to continue this conversation.
Yeah, and I'll save my questions on these for the regular meeting, so.
Okay.
Anybody else, if you have something quick, because I know we,
I just had one quick question, or maybe it's not quick, but do we have an estimate for when we're going to be able to repay the interfund transfer, when we're going to be able to get that money back into the health insurance fund? And maybe you've already told me this, and I should know.
We're planning to do it before the end of the fiscal year.
So
before June
30th.
30th. Yep.
I mean,
Is there a legal debt, is there an
The
October?
legal, October is
Must
the,
happen.
must
Yeah,
happen by
must
the end
happen
of
by
October.
the time.
Yep.
I mean, because as we all know, health insurance costs aren't going down. So that just has become more of a concern to me, that we need to have that revenue, that money in that fund. So by June 30th.
And I agree about repaying the principal. I'm wanting us to make sure that we calculate the total interest cost for that specific loan and in the specific terms for that loan.
Sure.
What the total interest cost actually was.
Sure.
so we only have about 5 minutes left. You want to get on to the audit update? If you have any questions that didn't get answered at this, we got the budget update, or the update at the meeting.
The audit update isn't particularly interesting, but exciting. We have engaged a new audit firm, Bonchak and Frommelt, and I apologize to that firm if I pronounced their name incorrectly. We have our planning meeting next week, which will be good. That will set our timeline for when we will actually have them conducting field work. We're currently shooting for late March, early April, which is about in line with the timeline they had scheduled with us. So we'll iron out specifically when we'll be doing field work at that audit planning meeting next week, and if there's going to be any interim field work between now and then to sort of ease that along. We will be considered a high-risk client just because of the timing of the audit, and that means expanded testing procedures, so we look forward to that. That'll be a lot of fun. But we are currently, overall, I think, fairly well positioned on our major accounts in terms of getting those cleaned up and reconciled. We still have a few activities we need to take a look at. Specifically, capital still needs to be reconciled, but that one should not be a big deal. And then the activities account, which also shouldn't be a major problem to go out and reconcile. The biggest task has just been correcting some of the erroneous entries, we'll call them, that have been on the books.
So can you update us on where you're at with the corrective action plan for the FY23 audit?
In process. I mean, the biggest thing is, right, a lot of those control deficiencies that were noted in that audit, and all those are scheduled to be resolved by March of 27, if memory serves. So anything that was identified in 23, if it is a ongoing control deficiency in fiscal year 24, will still likely be a control deficiency during that time. That's why we provided those timelines for resolving the issues.
Were there some things that were supposed to be resolved by December 31st?
Minor things, like
Okay.
removing some control from Adam, so making sure the CFO doesn't have access to enter ledger activity. Also, I don't enter ledger activity to make sure we're maintaining that level of segregation. So some of the smaller items have been resolved, but the larger control deficiencies noted in the audit are still ongoing.
Yeah, I think to expand on what Alan said, we've made some adjustments based on that, but in the audits for the years between now and then, that's still gonna show up because we made that corrective action in FY 25 or 26. And so whatever was called out as corrective action in FY 23 is still gonna show up in FY 24. But we may have made operational changes to correct that.
Sure.
Now.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, do we have any idea of a timeline? Are we going to be a year and a half behind on the other two audits, or are we going to, or will we catch up?
It is a staggering amount of work ahead of us, but our plan is to be conducting the fiscal year 26 audit at or around March of next year, which will very plausibly have that one be late, but not terribly. So if we can get that done in January or February, that would be ideal. But it
Can you
is
say that again? What was the date? I'm just making notes.
March of 27 is our plan to be completing our final audit at or near that time.
Okay. Now it's 5:52. Any other questions? Seeing that there are no other questions for the audit, is there a motion?
I'll move to adjourn.
Or wait, no, I need to do agenda set. Do we do agenda setting with this? No, we don't. Or is it just adjournment?
I think you
Just
just
adjournment. Okay, adjournment. So Charlie is the motion, second.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.